Perhaps the most surreal scene in the movie, the Do Lung Bridge sequence would be the audience's halfway point in the Redux version and would signify a gateway into the unknown. The Do Lung Bridge sequence was shot in early to mid-August of 1976. After the hiatus caused by the typhoon and boat issues, they shot the mission briefing scene and the hotel scene, and only 4 days later they were filming at the Do Lung Bridge. Peter Cowie writes that by the time Willard gets to Do Lung, he has split into two different men. One who is considerate and concerned for the younger guys, and the other is pushing and relentless. It is difficult to say exactly how similar this split is to Coppola himself, but Martin Sheen said, "I have a lot of mixed feelings about Francis. I'm very fond of him personally. The thing I love about him most is that he never, like a good general, asked you to do anything he wouldn't do. He was right there with us, lived there in the shit and the mud up to his ass, suffered the same diseases, ate the same food. I don't think he realizes how tough he is to work for. God, is he tough. But I will sail with that son of a bitch anytime." At the same time, the press mocked Coppola for throwing an extravagant birthday party for Eleanor while asking his crew to tighten their belts financially. Coppola worried that he was becoming too self-indulgent, but he would need to trust that his instincts would get him where he needs to go.
Germany. With extreme prejudice. Are you an assassin or a soldier?
This episode is sponsored by Mubi, where you can stream exceptional films from around the globe. Try it free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description. The scene plays out almost exactly as it does in John Milius's 1969 draft of the script. That said, one thing that doesn't appear in that version of the screenplay, or Coppola's 1975 rewrite, is the part where Lance says that he dropped acid.
Hey, you know that last tab of acid I was saving? Yeah. I dropped it.
What's kind of interesting is that you can see in the work print that this exchange was tightened up a bit.
Hey, you know that last tab of acid I was saving? Yeah. I dropped it.
During the hiatus, Coppola told Sam Bottoms, who played Lance, that he made some changes. One, that Lance was no longer going to die at the end of the movie, and the other was that Lance was going to drop acid during the Do Lung sequence. Bottoms talked about actually doing drugs during most of the making of the movie in interviews for the Hearts of Darkness documentary, which came across a little sensationalized. He revealed that he took speed instead of acid during the Do Lung sequence to give an edge to his performance, and because they were shooting long hours. He said he was on acid in other scenes. In another interview, he said, "Most of my character is done under the influence of pot. I smoked a lot of that. You know, the film crew just became our guests upriver with us." Yet again, we see the lines between production and the story itself blur. In an interview for the LA Times in 2001, Bottoms regretted revealing his drug use on the set in the Hearts of Darkness documentary, saying, "I realized after that interview I had sort of broken an actor's code. I regret that very much. I believe that whatever it takes for an actor to get to a scene, that's his business. And I don't think that's something to be shared with the public." As the patrol boat approaches the bridge, they are met with several US soldiers with suitcases, begging to be taken out of there. The place had been originally described in the script as the cesspool of hell, but was later changed to the asshole of the world.
You're in the asshole of the world, Captain!
This description was not far off from some of the filming locations in the eyes of the cast and crew, who were not used to living in such a tropical setting. Many of them got parasites and tropical diseases, which they would have to deal with while waiting to get proper medical treatment. Bottoms got hookworm, which damaged his liver. Two doctors, quote, together treated a daily average of 90 cases of fractures, influenza, gastroenteritis, fungal infections, hypertension, and even monkey bites. It's hard to say how much of this is related to the drug use of some of the cast and crew, but alcohol was much more prevalent, and it seems that the combination of alcohol use with the long hours of difficult work in a rough climate took a toll on people's health. There was reportedly a growing resentment that money was mostly being spent on the higher-ups, while the rest of the crew was left to suffer. Some of the crew were even stopped from going to Manila to bathe, make calls, and take care of health issues. Script supervisor Nancy Tonery said, "It was like the people clinging to the landing struts of helicopters trying to get out of Saigon." The Do Lung Bridge was built on a site of a real bridge that had been destroyed by the Japanese in World War II and never rebuilt. The crew built a new bridge on top of the concrete footing sticking out from the riverbed from the original. The bridge for the movie was designed by John Lysandra, who made this 700-foot-long bridge using coconut logs as piles and wooden plants for the roadway. The bridge was constructed by over 350 inhabitants of Baylor and, quote, required makeshift mechanical devices to set the logs in place. Some logs were fake and made from styrofoam, fiberglass, resin, and real log barks. As we discussed in previous episodes, cinematographer Vittorio Storaro's main approach to the cinematography of the movie was the idea of one culture imposing itself on another, and the clash between the artificial and the natural. This sequence is perhaps the best example of that aesthetic. Storaro wanted to use this interplay of light and shadow as a metaphor in Apocalypse Now, as he did earlier in The Conformist. For The Conformist, the light and shadow were meant to allude to Plato's allegory of the cave. In the allegory, prisoners are chained in a cave unable to turn around, and all they've ever been able to see is the shadows being projected on the cave wall in front of them. One of the prisoners manages to escape and sees what the world is really like, and returns to the cave to tell the others, but they don't believe him. For The Conformist, this was meant to represent the artifice of fascism, but here, it represents cinema itself, and we the audience are the prisoners looking at the shadows of reality on the screen.
Cinema has nothing to do with reality. When they say we're doing cinema verite, real cinema, it's not true. Cinema is an interpretation of reality. We can be believable for real element, but it's over interpretation. And that's fantastic, this kind of concept.
Personally, I feel like this was at the forefront of Storaro's and Coppola's minds while making the Do Lung sequence. It doesn't break with the logic of the world it has created, but it's the most surreal scene in the movie and marks the movie being pushed to a level of stylization that confirms its subjective viewpoint. This isn't Platoon. It isn't trying to portray a somewhat objective view of the war, which Storaro just said is impossible. Instead, we are getting a feeling of how incomprehensible war is and what it's like to travel into your own quote-unquote heart of darkness. The scene represents the futility of war. The bridge is in a constant state of being destroyed and rebuilt almost simultaneously.
So the idea was that this bridge was sort of the last place, and the idea was that they would say this bridge is open, and at night the NVA or the VC would mortar it, and just enough to mortar the whole area considerably, or assault the area, try and tear it down so that they could say the bridge was down.
Of everything, of going up, that was supposed to be the last thing that they cross, where everything's insane. And they know it's insane, and nothing makes any sense. And to go beyond that is to go into a nether world.
Stephen Travers writes, "Every night the combatants blew each other up with no winners or losers, a metaphor for the way the US fought in Vietnam. There is no discipline, no moral order, and no commanding officer." And this is punctuated by what sounds like circus music on the soundtrack. Milius had said that part of where he got the idea for the scene was from Michael Hare's writings on the Battle of Khe Sanh. In the 1968 Battle of Khe Sanh, US Marines defended a South Vietnam base against North Vietnam. Despite the initially successful defense, the base was dismantled due to continued attacks, and both sides claimed victory. You can read more about the Battle of Khe Sanh in this episode's companion PDF for $1. There was a bit that was cut out that gives a little more info on what's going on here.
What is this? This bridge is of strategic importance for keeping the highway into SURREAL open. Every night they build it, and by 0800 Charlie's blown it to shit. Kids plus a lot of good men, but the generals like to say that road is open. Nobody uses that road but Charlie, Captain.
The filming of the sequence took 13 nights, with each night costing between $30,000 and $50,000, putting the production way over budget. Each night, the special effects team would blow the bridge up, and each day, production designer Dean Tavoularis would have it rebuilt, just like in the story. It was really difficult to light such a big area in the jungle with only one 1,000-amp generator. Storaro's solution was to have several towers, with each having one arc light. Storaro said, "We had an electrician on each tower, and I would talk to them by walkie-talkie and tell them where to aim the light. I also remember asking special effects supervisor Joe Lombardi to create some explosions in spots where I needed some light. We see some spotlights and string lights on the bridge, but a lot of the light comes from fire, explosions, and flares that would create a sudden brilliant light and then slowly fade away. Second Unit DP Stephen Burham said, Joe Lombardi was going to demonstrate these parachute flares. He was planning to shoot them up in the air, where they would hang and light up a whole huge area. Well, the flares didn't work because the air was so humid that they wouldn't even burn. Vittorio's solution was to really use the black areas of the scene, and the highlights provided by the arc lights and photo floods that we did use in the scene. It took well over a week to set up the first night of shooting. In her diary, Eleanor Coppola describes the feeling that night, writing, "Maybe it was the fires that special effects started, and the arc lights illuminating the hundreds of extras in costumes in the trenches. Maybe it was knowing that after all the rehearsing and preparing, this was it. There was a kind of electricity in the air. Parts seemed like a circus. It was very hot and humid. I could see the sweat running down people's faces when they passed in front of a light. Both channels of the radio were going as the first shot was being set up. I could hear, 'We need 10 Vietnamese extras to be dead in the water. Light the downstream burners. Makeup check for GI extras now. Bring the crane to the upstream position on the tropical side. Bring the generator barge to the camera first position,' and on and on." On night 2, a coconut fell from a tall tree and nearly hit one of the extras in the trench. They laughed it off and started playing catch with it. At one point, a big web of lightning streaked across the sky, and the special effects guys laughed and jokingly asked Joe Lombardi how he did that. Coppola wanted all of the soldiers in the scene to look, quote, young and scared, and even had his 12-year-old son Gio play one of the background extras while they filmed late into the night, which I have to imagine was a really cool bonding experience to have with your dad. The shoot was exhausting. 10 days later, there was some confusion about whether Albert Hall should be looking left or right during his close-up. The script supervisor said right, but Storaro thought it was left, and there wasn't enough time to do it both ways. On what was supposed to be the last day of shooting, they realized that they were still going to need 2 more days. Coppola laid out a shot in the early evening and went back to his house for a cup of soup. It was raining the whole time, and when he got back to the set, he found that the river had risen nearly 6 feet. So this actor, who was supposed to walk along the riverbank, now had to wade waist deep to get to the boat. The man delivers another document for the Kurtz dossier and some mail for the boat. Willard leaves the boat in search of fuel and to get some information from the commanding officer. Lance goes with him. Back on day 6, they started filming the sequence in the trench. Eleanor Coppola notes that by this time, the circus mood was gone. The rain that day had made the bottom of the trench a giant mud puddle, but they needed a dolly for the scene. So the key grip and his guys dumped a bunch of sand, packed it down, and laid sandbags and wooden boards on top. The wet wood was really heavy, and these guys had to struggle in the hot, humid rain to get it in there, and then the dolly track, and then the dolly, and then the mount, and then the camera. One guy's job that night was to towel the mud off the track every time the dolly passed. Sounds rough, right? Well, they began rehearsing the scene with the actors, and on the 3rd rehearsal, quote, a large section of the trench wall caved in, covering the track with a couple of tons of dirt and sandbags. It took forever to get everything back to the way it was, but finally they were ready to shoot. Coppola wanted smoke, so one of the special effects guys sprayed a bunch of gray mist that smelled like oily insect repellent, and because the wind kept changing, they had to put in a new batch before every take, which irritated everyone's eyes and lungs. And all that for this shot right here. On a nearby radio, we hear a psychedelic guitar solo. This was performed by a Jimi Hendrix impersonator named Randy Hansen. He recorded a bunch of guitar for the movie, but perhaps what's most interesting is that he also recorded ambient noises and even some sound effects with his guitar for various parts of the movie. That's a guitar making that sound. I'll talk more about him in the post-production episodes. This scene with the roach is one of my favorites in the whole movie. Willard and Lance come across a couple of guys shooting wildly into the jungle, but failing to hit the last Viet Cong soldier left. They shoot a flare.
Oh shit, he's trying to call his friends, man. Send him a flare.
The production crew needed the light from the flare to hit a certain spot from a certain height to illuminate the actors' faces consistently in every take. So a Filipino climbed 80 feet up a coconut tree and attached a pulley. Then the special effects guys could hoist a flare up and get it down to reload between takes. Willard asks,
Who's the commanding officer here?
Ain't you?
Lance, who is tripping on acid, is mesmerized by the light of the flare and sits on top of the sandbags, leaving himself open to be shot. Willard yells at him to get down.
Lance! Do you hear him?
This is another interesting tweak, as we can see in the work print. One of the soldiers goes to wake up the Roach. Roach is asked if he needs them to send up a flare so he can find the Viet Cong soldier. Roach shakes his head.
He's close, man. He's real close.
The chaotic sounds of the battle begin to fade away. Editor Walter Murch said, "What was interesting was to create a sonic environment where we took sounds away. You look at the scene and see explosions going off, but you don't hear any of them. Because in that particular scene, we're going into an aural consciousness of a character called Roach, who is a human bat. The way he hears the war, when he sets out to kill Charlie, and he echolocates Charlie, he doesn't hear anything except Charlie. The goal was to get audiences into the place where they hear only what Roach hears."
Scene. I love the scene with the Roach, you know, where he says, you know where he is? He says, yeah, I'm cool, man. And he doesn't even take his M7, he doesn't put the sights up or anything, he just listens, you know, and it's painted, you know, and he shoots the thing, kills the guy, and then he says, do you know who's in charge here? And he says,
Yeah.
As close as the scene with the Roach is to Milius's 1969 draft of the script, this part at the end doesn't appear in that draft or even Coppola's 1975 rewrite. One thing that's interesting is that Roach is described in Milius's draft of the script as wearing a helmet that says, "God bless Dow," and this was changed to Black Power in the movie. Dow refers to Dow Chemical, a company that manufactured napalm for the US during the Vietnam War, and which was the target of widespread protests by American college students after an article showed pictures of napalm's effects on Vietnamese civilians, which prompted Martin Luther King Jr. to go public with his opposition to the war. Dow was also responsible for manufacturing Agent Orange, a chemical that was used to remove leaves from trees that the North Vietnamese would hide under, and became infamous for causing horrible illnesses in Vietnam veterans well after the war ended. I imagine that Roach's helmet was changed to avoid any potential legal issues. Coppola usually got home around 3 a.m. during the Do Lung Bridge sequence, but for this part with the Roach, he didn't get home until 6 in the morning. The silence of this interaction with the Roach is cut by an explosion that knocks 2 American soldiers off the bridge. One of these men is stunt coordinator Terry Leonard, and the two did this 62-foot fall into shallow water. Leonard served the same role on the movie John Milius chose to direct instead of Apocalypse Now, The Wind and the Lion. Leonard did all of the horse stunts in the movie himself. Willard and Lance arrived back at the boat with some more ammunition. And apart from Milius' script that didn't make it into the movie, was a soldier trying to get clean to take some letters he wrote, saying goodbye to everyone he knew and that it's been a great 20 years of life, noting that there are tons of North Vietnamese with mortars, rockets, snipers in the trees, and that they'll all be killed. But he asks for his letters back when he finds out they're going upriver instead of down. The exchange between Chief and Willard where he asks,
"Which way, Captain?"
and Willard responds,
You know which way, Chief.
doesn't appear in either the 1969 draft or the 1975 rewrite. Chief is visibly scared. They are now moving into uncharted territory.
Who cares?
Just get us upriver.
It seems that Willard and Lance got back just in time because the NVA begins a final bombardment of the bridge. For the incredible final shots of the scene involving the patrol boat speeding away as the bridge is destroyed, this one 90-second take would use, quote, more than 500 smoke bombs, 100 phosphorus sticks, 1,200 gallons of gasoline, 50 water explosions consisting of 35 sticks of dynamite apiece, 2,000 rockets, flares, tracers, and 5,000 feet of detonating cord. The crew had arrived at 5:30 p.m. to set up the shot. Marketing director Lee Beaupre describes the moments leading up to the shot. Head gaffer Luciano Galli was coordinating the lighting to focus on the river where the 2 PBRs were moored near the bridge. This is picture. It was nearly 2 a.m., and Jerry Zeismer, assistant director, was on the bullhorn alerting everyone. The moment for the take had come, and there would be no take 2. Special effects coordinator Joseph Lombardi unleashed 150 explosives, each charged with 2.5 pounds of Gel-X, 800 feet of explosive primer cord already wrapped around the beams sliced the bridge, while dynamite and black powder set 600 gallons of gasoline afire. More than 60 rockets and tracers erupted. On the next episode of Making Apocalypse Now, we'll look at the scene in which the crew of the patrol boat is ambushed while reading their mail, and the crazy story behind the hugely expensive French plantation sequence that was ultimately cut from the theatrical version. What are you watching tonight? Can I make a suggestion? There's a really interesting movie called The Five Obstructions, where director Lars von Trier challenges a filmmaker friend to remake his short film 5 times, each time under a new constraint, such as no shot lasting more than 12 frames, and to remake the short as a cartoon. It's a fascinating look into creative decision-making. You can watch it right now with this episode's sponsor, Mubi. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected. Discover the best of cinema at your fingertips, streaming anytime, anywhere. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/CinemaTyler. That's mubi.com/CinemaTyler for a whole month of great cinema for free.